Hi, I'm François Vigneault, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's September 24th, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with François Vigneault. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. François is a freelance cartoonist, illustrator, designer, and teacher, not necessarily in that order, living in Montreal, Quebec. He's a creator of the graphic novel Titan, soon to be published in an updated English edition by Oni Press. Titan was originally published in French by Pow Pow Press in 2017. He's also the co-creator of 13th Avenue, a YA comic book series created with Genevieve Peterson and published by Éditions de la Pastille. His comics and illustrations have appeared in publications such as Carriole Ring, Planche, Paper Cutter, Kayak, and Study Group magazine. His works have been nominated for numerous awards, including the Joe Shuster Award and Le Prix des Collages. So without further ado, here's my chat with François Vigneault. So François Vigneault, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Hey, John, it's my pleasure.
Oh, I appreciate your time. Thank you. What I normally do to start off the conversation is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Oh, the first comic I read. When I was a kid, I grew up reading the comics at the local library. I remember I would read the Spider-Man daily comic strips that would be collected, or those little paper. Remember those sort of paperback strips of BC or the Wizard of Id and things like that. Yeah. Kind of standard paperback format. I think those maybe were the very first little comic strips that I ever read. I would read them at the library. I think the first comic I bought, funnily enough, was the Archie Comics version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So, oh, wow. Yeah, so instead of, the TMNT started with Eastman and Laird doing their kind of black and white indie thing, but that wasn't my introduction to it at all. It was like the cartoon show on TV, and Archie Comics did a comic book that was very, very similar to that. That was based on that. So I think that was what first brought me into the comic book store, was that comic. And then, and then from there, then the comic book store guy gets you kind of turned on to all sorts of other stuff. So, but my start was with these sort of almost anonymous Archie TMNT comics that were pretty fun.
Good. Then the next question I have for you is, who or what inspires you to create today?
Oh, today. Now, how do you mean that? Do you mean like what artists do I find inspiring, or? Sure. Yeah. Is there anyone you're reading today? Any artwork or artist that you follow? Sure. I mean, there, of course, like anyone who's kind of involved in the arts, there's a lot of different people I'm following and interested. But do you know who's someone? It's actually a pair of someone's, but there's a couple, French couple, and they go by the name of Carrascoët, and they do they're artists, and they work together on the same. They draw together on the same page, and they have a couple different books and series over the years. Some that came out in English include Beauty, that was really good, and another one called Beautiful Darkness, and another one called Miss Don't Touch Me. And I liked all of those books. They're a pair of artists who work in a wide range of styles, very varied, and they kind of tend to work with some really good writers and do things that are sort of based on fairy tales or fantasies. And I think that they've got something special. So they've been really inspiring to me for the last few years. Great. Good. So I'm talking to you and others under the context of the Montreal Comic Arts Festival and other events that unfortunately didn't happen this year for one reason or another. So I'm wondering, what were you planning to showcase? Yes. The Montreal Comics Art Festival. I love that festival. Yes. So I moved to Montreal 5 years ago, and so I've exhibited it for the last 4 years, and one in some way or another. Really cool festival. This year they did a all virtual festival, which was really fun, and I got to participate just a little tiny bit in that. I did an interview. I was on the other side of the chair for an interview with a German cartoonist, Reinhard Fleist, who was going to come to the show, but he couldn't. He ended up not being able to come, of course, because the festival was canceled. But I did think that it was really cool that MCAF did a show that was. They went 100% virtual. They recorded all of their interviews, panels, roundtable discussions, and everything, and they're all still available online. So I thought that was really cool that they kind of came to the realization that there was no way that they could do it in person, and they just they scrambled and they worked really hard. I know the team, and it ended up coming out pretty well. Over the years, I've really liked that show. It's I'm not sure if you've ever been to it, but it's a it's a free show, which that's always been really important to me. I think that comic book shows, it's a really good idea if they're free, because I've always thought it was a little strange to have people pay $10-$20 to come into a room and then pay more money to buy comics. I'd rather that it was a bigger, broader group of people, which I think you can get when it's free. And then the Montreal Comic Arts Festival is really cool because it takes place right in the middle of the city in the Parc La Fontaine, and so you get people from every kind of demographic, like moms with their kids, and older citizens, and people who love comics, and people who just have no idea about comics, but they just happen to be in the park that day, and they wander through and go through the tents and everything. So overall, I really dig the vibe of that show.
Yeah, that's one show I've really lamented not going to, and certainly that's one I want to get to in the future. But you've been there in the past, so I'm wondering if you have any favorite memories that you can share with us about that particular show.
Oh, well, maybe it was one of the very first things I did when I moved here. I'm from the United States, and I moved to Montreal 5 years ago. And I remember I happened to move here. I first arrived just like maybe a week before the festival was going to be. About 5 years ago. And so it was kind of like my introduction to the city in a way. I guess overall, just my favorite memory of that was just meeting some of the cartoonists, especially meeting people that I later on would become friends with or would become collaborators. I met, lots of the artists that my book Titan, when it was published in French, I met lots of the artists that worked with that publishing house. Overall, that first year was kind of a little bit special for me, because it was just, it was my introduction to a new group of people. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I understand you have a new book out that maybe we could talk a bit about. It's called Titan?
Yes. I wrote it, and it first came out in French a couple of years ago in 2017. But it's finally getting published in November from Oni Press, which is a comic book publisher in the United States. So I'm really excited. It's coming out in English for the first time.
Cool. What was the original reception for the version that came out from Pow Pow Press?
Oh, well, I was very, very pleased with it. It was my first book, and so I went into it with pretty low expectations. I was very excited that the publisher at Pow Pow was interested in publishing it in French, and so I finished it up for the French edition. And then it came out, and I'm not sure if you've gotten to check out like the book publishing scene in Quebec, but it's really strong. I think that there's a real interest in supporting the artists who are from here, who live here, Quebecois artists, especially in the French language. And I was kind of taken back by the amount of energy and support that Titan got right from the jump. Lots of people were reviewing it. It got good reviews right away. The booksellers seemed to really like it. And I met a lot of the people who worked in bookstores and in comic book shops. They really liked the book. They were really supportive of it right from the start. And then after that, it started getting all these award nominations. It really surprised me. Like first I got nominated for one award, then another award. And I kept thinking, I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm getting nominated for awards. And but I ended up with 6 award nominations and no prizes, but that's okay. No, that it's like it really is one of those things where they say it's an honor just to be nominated. I couldn't believe that it was nominated for so many prizes. It was really wild. And I felt like it really I was really lucky. It cemented my position in the kind of the Quebec comic scene. As soon as Titan came out, I was also approached by another publisher to do another book. So I did 13th Avenue, it's called, with another author And so that came out a year after Titan. So I've been busy ever since. And like now it's interesting. It's finally Titan's coming out in the American market, and I'm from the United States. I lived most of my life in the United States, so it'll be really interesting to me to see what the reaction is in the States compared to in Quebec and in Canada, which is I felt really welcomed and felt like I definitely have been welcomed, I guess is the simplest way to put it, since I immigrated here a couple of years ago.
Sure. No, it's a great book, but I'm wondering if you could summarize it for those perhaps not familiar with it. How would you describe it to someone?
Oh, sure. And I mean, this is the question that you get asked all the time. And then I'm never that good at it. I always try and defer to other people, but basically it's set in the future on the moon of Titan, and all the workers on the moon of Titan, where there are these mining facilities, and all of the workers there are giants. They have all been genetically engineered to work in the low gravity on the moon of Titan. And all of their managers are quote unquote normal people from the earth like you or I. So there's this elevated conflict between the workers and the management, but all the workers are like 8 to 10 to 12 feet tall, and the managers are dwarfed by them. And so it's a book kind of metaphorically about like class tension, racial tensions. Anyone who reads the book now will see that there's a lot of sort of alarming parallels with, the current situation in the United States and around the world, but also a lot of historical things too. I was very inspired by historical accounts of strikes and labor relations and what have you. So that's the big picture. It's about two people also from the two different camps, two very different people who are brought together. And they're just kind of in the middle of the river of history, right? And they try and affect it in one way or another, and many times it's just affecting them, and so they're trying to do their best.
Well, it's definitely a page turner because it really grabs the reader, and you want to see what happens. And on the setting of Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn, it has that compelling sort of environment, and pretty cool.
Cool. Good. That's fantastic to hear.
Yeah. One of the things that I didn't clue in until the very end, I don't think this is a surprise for someone, but you have musical selections referenced at the end of the book. Which is really cool. So I'm wondering, should the reader listen to each song while reading the specified chapter, or did you listen to these songs while creating the pages themselves?
That's one of the sort of little conceits of the book, is it's set about 200 years in the future. And so the two main characters, they both happen to be fans of 20th and 21st century music, which is quite old for them. And I would encourage anyone can listen to the music while you read the chapter, although most of the chapters I think take more than 3 or 4 minutes to read. But I actually made a Spotify playlist of all the songs that are the little musical selection in the end. And definitely the work did inspire me. It started with the concept of this musical connection between these characters, and then from there I started naming the chapters. There's a few times where there's actually like the lyrics of a song in the chapter, but most of the time it's just a sort of a reference. So for instance, there's a chapter where like there's more of like combat or war or something like that in the book, and there's a chapter called Life During Wartime based on the Talking Heads song. I definitely would sometimes listen to the music. I would think about the music and the way that the lyrics might kind of inspire me. I definitely didn't feel like I was 100% beholden to kind of like connect the dots every single time. Like sometimes the connection is very much like a ephemeral emotional connection rather than like a one-to-one connection. But many times I was inspired by the music. So if any readers or listeners, I guess, feel the desire to listen to the music while they read the book or afterwards, I would think that would be a win. I would love that.
Cool. I want to take a step back and talk about your creative process, how you go from the initial concept to the finished page. I wonder if you could walk me through how you get that done.
Oh, well, sure. I'm not sure if I have any fantastic insight because my process is rather
loose in a way. I don't write a full script for the book, and in fact, much of the book was improvisational as I went along. Like when I started the book, I knew basically how I was going to end the book. I knew some of the ideas and beats and characters that were going to happen during the course of the story, but I didn't, for instance, know very specific things. Like, I won't get into spoilers, but for instance, I didn't know that the character of Phoebe, the Titan character of Phoebe, that she would have a history in like what I call the mixing circuit, where she's like a fighter, basically. She's
okay.
And so that wasn't part of my initial concept. And there was only like a couple chapters in that I was like, oh, maybe that would be a cool idea. And I kind of improvisationally added that in. Definitely, it's very loose. Towards the end, it got a little bit smoother and cleaner too, because I was writing and drawing the comic faster, and so I understood a little bit more exactly, and I could see the end was in sight. But definitely in the beginning and the middle stages of the book, it was still very, very wide open. So I don't write a script or anything. I usually I draw very loose sort of thumbnails / pencils, and I do most of the drawing happens at the quote unquote inking stage, even though now I draw completely 100% digitally because it's just a lot faster for me. So I like to work that way. And so what I'll usually do is I'll kind of lay things out, kind of start with the word balloons, and I'll move them around as I go, but I'll change them as I draw, or I'll change the drawings as I need to. You may also have noticed that almost all the comic is on like a sort of a 3-tier grid, so that the panels are almost always the same size, or there's just a couple of different sizes of panels, and so I definitely move things around also a lot. Like I'll take them and I'll take a page, and if it's not working out, I'll chop it up, turn it into 2 pages, or condense 2 pages into 1 page, etc.
Cool. It's funny you said digital, but to me it looks so organic that I would never have guessed that.
Oh, that's good. Well, I don't mind that at all. That's basically my goal in drawing digitally. I grew up drawing on a piece of paper with ink, and I that's definitely like at the heart of my artistic practice and how I think about comics. I don't really want to make something that looks very artificial or like kind of with lots of like digital gradients or anything like that in there. So when I moved to doing the artwork digitally, I really was just trying to replicate exactly the same sort of thing that I did on paper. And for any readers that are interested, they'll see that the first 2 or 3 chapters of Titan, those actually were drawn on a piece of paper with ink. And then I think it's basically after chapter 4, it's all digital. And so that if any very interested people can take a look at some of, like some of the very small little details and like the mistakes and things that I made on the more analog side. But I don't mind that at all. I really appreciate that it doesn't look very digital at all. I take that as a compliment.
Okay, good. So you've got Titan done. In fact, it was done already, and it's now coming out in English. I'm wondering if have any other projects on the go that you can talk about.
Gosh, I do. I have a lot of stuff that I'm working on, but unfortunately, there's the rub, is that there's a lot of the stuff I can't talk about. I can talk in some vague sort of terms about it. I'm drawing a new monthly comic, which is totally a trip for me because I'm definitely I've been more on the indie / alternative / graphic novel side throughout my whole career. And then now I'm drawing something that's going to come out every single month in comic book stores starting in 2021.
Wow.
So it's totally a trip, but it's not announced, so I can't tell the audience like who I'm doing it with. I'm just drawing it. I'm not writing it, but it's going to come out starting in early 2021. It'll be announced sometime in the next few months, I would imagine. And it's a kind of a funny sci-fi fantasy comedy series, and so very different than Titan. Like it has a totally different kind of vibe and feel. I'm definitely tapping more into that kind of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles vibe that we talked about at the beginning, or like Stan Sakai with Usagi Yojimbo or something like that, and going way back into the comics I used to read back in the day. And then the next thing, I'm working on my own graphic novel, which it's still really in the early stages also, and that will come out. I'm hoping to start really working on that one in earnest, but that's going to be another book that I write and draw myself. So I'm really the most excited about that, as you can imagine.
Sure. No, that sounds good. So where can people find out about these projects that are up and coming online?
Oh, sure. Well, my website is it's my name with a dash in the middle, so François-Vigneault.com, and I'm on Instagram and stuff at François Vigneault. FrancoisVigneault, Instagram and all that stuff. I try and keep it pretty simple for people. And then Titan will be out in stores on November 10th from Oni Press, and that's basically in any normal bookstore or any comic book store. I think that the deadline for pre-ordering at a comic book store is coming up pretty soon in October. So yeah, it's gonna be out there. It's gonna be available. So I hope people get the chance to pick it up.
Well, Francois, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering if there's something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview.
I mean, just because you do a Canadian comics-centric podcast, the only thing I would say is just that I think it's really interesting, the energy and the vibe around comics and publishing and in Quebec and Canada is very different than the United States. And so I don't know. I think that all the Canadians out there should be really proud of the kind of like culture of the creative culture that you have developed here in this country. I can say that having lived in both countries now for extended periods of time, I think that there's a really good healthy creative culture here, and I definitely appreciate it.
Thanks to François for the chat. You can discover more about François on Instagram at instagram.com/FrancoisVigneault and online at François-Vigneault.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2020.